Hey, Happy New Year, I guess. And welcome to the
2025.
2025. Yes, welcome to Bulldog Tech Talks. Is that that's the name of that's still the name of our podcast?
Yeah,
I always got it wrong
sure.
last year and it's been months. So I think it's still called Bulldog Tech
Okay.
Talks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, we've got a lot of things planned for today. We want to talk about kind of learning space rating systems, and it's kind of a interesting way that helps us in designing classrooms. And we're going to go a little bit into depth on that. We also have a little bit of a new segment that is called Fairy Tales and Folklore. Might have
Mm,
that backward. Might be Folklore and Fairy Tales.
that one sounds better, so it should be that.
I think that is actually what it
Okay,
is.
good.
So we're going to kind of go in and just kind of look at a piece of fiction and see kind of what we can learn about AI from that piece of fiction. So yeah, so to get started, let's talk about learning space rating systems.
What is Thomas Fitzler? A learning space.
Well, I think the common vernacular of that would be a classroom,
Sure.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. And especially I think in higher ed settings, the definition of what is a classroom is even more difficult of a question to answer because, as you all know, there are many different spaces where learning takes place, but the structure, the physical setup of that space can be very, very different, especially across buildings on campus.
Sure, definitely. And to say a classroom is a little bit of a misnomer because, we've got our very standard classrooms, but then we've got lab areas, we've got computer labs. Uh, Technically, we even categorize some, but not all, because again, this is very confusing. Some video conferencing areas are technically learning spaces as well. So it gets a little bit granular, but for the most part, most of you can probably think of this as just a classroom.
Yeah, or a place where learning is taking place.
Oh, I like that a lot, actually. Let's
Learning
go with that.
space rating system, sort of in the name.
So yeah, tell me about kind of what you've been working on.
Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about not just a physical layout of a classroom, but how that space sort of has a necessity to reflect the type of learning that's happening in that classroom. So it makes a lot of sense for me as an English student or a creative writing student to like have classes where we had all of our desks in a circle and we were all facing each other because those are largely discussion-based collaborative classes where we're doing a lot of workshopping and critiquing. So it's a lot less of the traditional method of delivery of lecture style, all students facing the lecturer, delivering the information, taking your notes, et cetera, et cetera. So sort of starting with that point, I wanted to kind of launch off into this idea of how can we better design spaces on campus to help our students feel like that space itself is reflective of the type of learning that they are hoping to accomplish in that room. So I know that before I was working here, this was something that you might have tackled, that the team before has worked on a little bit with this thing called the LSRS, which is the Learning Space Rating System via EDUCAUSE, which
Yes.
is a educational consortium for higher ed. Um, and the LSRS is essentially just this checklist that you can use to go through a classroom and uh, over various categories saying, does this classroom have enough um, connection to daylight, or does it have enough network ports for wired internet connections? It's things like that. But yeah, so you guys have done this before I was here.
Yeah, so it was actually like right when I first started back in 2015.
Hmm.
Oh my gosh, I've been here for 10 years now. But
You're not old,
yeah, oh, well, I am,
just kind
but
of.
so yeah, it was actually one of the first projects I did back when I first started at Trivet, and it was the LSRS
Hmm.
by EduCloud, as you said, version one. And it was just this really objective measure of just a wholesale look at the classroom. Like you said, it was like connection to daylight. Like, does the classroom have windows? Some of your classrooms don't. And you know that seems like a little thing, but that makes a big difference. And
Hmm.
just if you're in there all day, every day. Some of the other things were the ambient noise in the room. If there's like really loud HVAC going on all the time, that could just kind of drone on and be distracting and kind of cancel out other sound that would be more important in the room, like you talking as an instructor. the square footage of the room itself versus the capacity of the room. So kind of that ratio of how
Mhm.
many people are in the room versus how big it is, which has shifted a little bit after COVID anyway. Just with some of our capacities kind of shifting. The desk size. So we have those,
Mhm.
those tablet desks. I can, spoiler alert, those didn't score well on LSRS. But yeah, just all of these kind of objective ways of looking at a classroom that can kind of help inform you of ways that you can improve the learning space.
Mhm.
And, looking forward, like this isn't a, pass or fail kind of thing.
Right.
This is more just, what are some areas that we can improve on in the future, just to, kind of put on our docket.
Yeah, it can be difficult to see something like a checklist that you're giving points for and to not have the conclusion that you are somehow failing something.
Right.
Instead, the LSRS's sort of ultimate goal is to not highlight the downfalls and then just the end. It's rather showing what you're scoring a little bit less high than you would like, and then being like, okay, so what should we do to improve that? It can be simultaneously a way to highlight spaces on campus that are scoring really well, and then being like, okay, great, why are these scoring well? You pick those apart. Is it because of the table structure? Is it the desk structure? Is it the multimodality or whatever it is? So I had looked at version 1 a little bit, but at this point, LSRS is at version 3.
Mm.
So when I started this project a few months ago, that was the most recent version. And I don't know necessarily if that end objective has changed, but the checklist itself has changed since the first version that you guys worked on.
Yeah, we were kind of surprised when we looked at it. The checklist seemed just kind of esoteric almost.
Very
Yeah,
abstract.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it was I felt that the goalposts were too far. Um, not necessarily just for Truman and keeping in mind our location and our size in our budget, but also keeping in mind of how far. So I guess the way that I could put this is LSRS version 3 seemed very, very, very interested in future-proofing classrooms. So the objective is how can this space be tweaked and modified in the future? Don't have this be something put in concrete, literally and figuratively. Like there's actually a point that's like, are these things poured in concrete, or are these rooms being able to be like um what's the word here? Sort of, like bisected or being able to be partitioned or whatever.
Right. A lot of it was stuff that we have absolutely no control over,
Right.
and unless we like massively renovated a building, I mean, it's
Yeah.
not going to change.
Yeah, because a lot of the categories were not just for instructional technologists or whatever. They would be like something that an architect would be aware of, or something that a campus planner would be aware of. Um, and that made my work a little bit more difficult because again, I don't really have any say of whether or not there are curves in the classroom walls. Because that was a building. We largely retrofit our buildings rather than construct new ones. Shout out Kirk though. That one is scored really well.
Oh, that's what we can do too at the end of the podcast is have some update on Kirk too. I've
That's
got some new
true.
photos.
I know a
So,
lot of our fans are really
oh
looking
yeah, the
forward to it.
dozens of them, if
Yeah,
that.
there's at least
Yeah.
3.
Yeah.
My parents and then somebody else, I'm sure.
Oh, my parents, yeah.
Okay,
So
there we
4.
go. 4.
All right.
But yeah, I mean, since we retrofit our buildings when we're doing renovations, it can be difficult for me to be able to say like, okay, so we don't have a classroom with windows. We can't just knock out a wall in a basement and suddenly have access to outside light, Like that's just
Right.
not how that's just not possible.
Right.
So I took a little bit of an issue with that. So I guess that kind of leads into our big point of what I've been doing instead. So, Kate Space rating system.
That's a working title. I don't know if we're gonna
Excuse
go
me,
with
it's the
that,
official
but
title, actually.
okay.
Yeah.
All
That I'm
right.
sure that everyone across the country would know exactly what I'm referring to when I say the
Of
KSRS.
course.
But essentially, we looked at LSRS version 3, the most recent version, and said, okay, these goalposts are a little far. In fact, even our rooms that we have put a lot of work and effort into improving and adjusting with this overall concept of does the space reflect the type of learning happening in it, even those spaces that we are extremely proud of weren't getting, like 80% and above on the LSRS version 3 just because again of there's like these architectural things that not necessarily we were aware of beforehand. If a room is in a basement, it's not going to have access. Again, it's like these abstract things.
Which again, I mean, it's not necessarily a pass or fail thing. It's
Right.
not like we're worried about whether or not rooms pass or fail. We just want to get the information. But
Right.
the information that we would be getting from the LSRS version 3 just would not be as helpful to us as we were hoping.
Exactly. Because again, it's like, okay, if this amazing room is in a basement, it's failing the daylight section. The next logical conclusion is what do we do to improve that? And there's literally just nothing for that example, you know?
Right.
So we took this idea of like, I'm running into a wall with this version 3, like why do I feel like we're not really connecting on this very well? And come to the conclusion that we needed something that was more tailored for Truman, that the goalposts were closer to what we can actually achieve, and the sort of achievements that we would be making are something that, again, goes back to this end objective of improving the space for the sake of the learning happening, not just because we're failing a checklist or a test or whatever it is. So, I was doing a lot of research from actually I looked at on EDUCAUSE's website LSRS version 3 and all of the articles that they had used to inform their new version. And I was just going through all of the resources myself and reading the articles about learning space design and active learning spaces and just getting all this new vernacular for words that I had no idea what they meant. And sort of coming to this conclusion that there's this idea now that there are like a few things that you want to be hitting on when you design a space. So taking these categories like comfort / aesthetics, flow, equity, blending, abstract terms, I know, but at the same time, it's good because we can take those abstract terms for like, what do we want a space to have? And then we can tailor it for Truman. So, especially when it comes to stuff like, I think the most important ones that I was coming up with was like learning with peers, collaboration. Collaboration is huge for a ton of our spaces. And it's, in fact, the rooms that we take the most pride in are often rooms that are collaboration oriented. I think you'd probably agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was taking research from other articles, scholarly articles, but also just reflecting at Truman as a whole and what have we found faculty and students to really like about classrooms. So again, we're finding stuff like collaboration. We're finding stuff like interactivity, not just faculty, but the students themselves in the classroom. And that can be something like interactivity in the sense of working together at the same screen in a group, but also something like the actual hardware itself being interactive, like being able to walk up to something and take, again, it's like these super fancy clear touches we've been putting around, being able to do interactive work on the technology itself. So we were looking at interactivity, experiences with faculty was another one, or just sort of like student to lecturer ease of interaction. I can probably speak for a few students and say that a lecture hall setup is not my cup of tea, but some classes just kind of demand a structure like that, a space like that. If you have a class of 50 plus students, you have to just sort of be in a setting like that. But you can take a setting like that and then think, okay, how can we make this a little bit more interactive with the student to faculty? How can we make it easier for a student to feel like they can ask questions in those spaces? So again, it's like these abstract concepts that are a little bit more tailored for Truman itself. And I've been finding that there have been some really, it's really cool to see as I'm working through what actual educational scholars are coming up with in terms of like what's important about a classroom space, and then seeing how that's already reflected in Truman spaces. So, and then
Sure.
sort of just, again, it's like highlighting these rooms that people really like on campus and then figuring out why they like them and then taking those sort of why points and then shaping my categories for the KSRS based on those points. So
Definitely. That kind of makes me wonder, like, if anybody has any suggestions. Are you open
mhm,
to them reaching out at ltt@truman.edu?
please do.
Cool. So yeah, so I mean, definitely, if there's anything that you really valued, let us know. And no guarantee it'll make it into the
KSRS.
the KSRS. We'll
Yeah.
call it that for now.
Can you put
Uh,
a little a trademark symbol after the KSRS, or
oh yeah,
that's how that works, right? That's how that works. We
I
just
think so. I think
okay.
that is legally binding.
Sure.
If you
Okay.
you put the
Perfect.
little asterisk or whatever by it.
Perfect.
So, but yeah, so let us know if you have anything that you really want to try to get in there for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. And I mean, just another point, kind of connecting to our Kirk preview we'll be doing as well. Kirk is a really good example of what you can do with a space that isn't being retrofitted. Kirk at this point is already, again, I feel a little bit weird saying scoring well because that can make it feel like it's pass fail, but in the sense of a learning space rating system, Kirk is doing really well because it is a space where we could start from ground zero and then have people like the architects and campus planners and instructional technologists sort of in the mix all at once, being able to say, okay, we want to be able to hit like lighting zones. And that was another point in the LSRS, like having instead of just light switches, having the sliders that can dim
Right.
and brighten as you want. And that's cool in a space like Kirk because as we're installing all of that stuff, we can actually still have the say in sort of those points in a learning space rating system.
Right.
So
It's easier to more intentionally design a space when you're
exactly.
actually working from the bottom up and not just
Right.
retrofitting an existing area.
Right. Yeah. So and Kirk is looking amazing.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe I'll just have thrown those pictures up while you were talking, and that can be our update then.
Okay. Yeah.
Cool.
No camp, no tour. I don't need to put on my safari hat
We
and
don't
walk
need a
around.
tour today.
Yeah,
That's all right.
that's all right.
But
Cool.
yeah, so we're looking forward to the KSRS or whatever it ends up being called, maybe the TSRS. I'll take it. I'll get all the credit for it after you do all the work, of course.
Of course, that's how that works, I think.
But we're looking forward to that. Maybe about a year from now, maybe we'll have some data that we can kind of share. But
Yeah, it's definitely a long-term project just because we're constantly renovating rooms anyway, but there are surprisingly, not surprisingly, a lot of classrooms on campus.
right,
So there's like a lot to actually work through and be able to
more
apply
more
this
than
to.
180, and each of these is going to take a little bit of time for you to get through. I mean,
Right. Because again, we're not taking this, that's another point with the LSRS that I didn't enjoy as much, is you're taking one checklist and trying to apply it to a ton of different physical layout spaces.
mhm.
Whereas because the KSRS is a slightly more abstract in terms of not saying like, are there enough network ports in this classroom? Well, this might be a gym, or like this might be a practical application space where you're trying to like work on it's like an athletic training lab. Like, of course, there probably wouldn't be a lot of network ports in an athletic training lab because I want it to reflect the type of learning happening in that space. So I'm not trying to be as specific as the LSRS could be, but let it sort of be tailored more towards different types of classrooms on campus.
Yeah, so you're trying to really Trumanify the
Exactly.
LSRS, but you're also kind of trying to make this something that other similar schools could use. And I think that you're
Yeah.
actually looking at potentially presenting some of your information next year. Is that right?
If all the cards fall into place. That's the saying, right? Cards
I,
fall.
I guess I don't know. I think so.
Okay. Sure. Yeah, I mean, it would be cool. And I if something like, EDUCAUSE is always looking for community input
Yeah.
in their just like surveys and whatever. And on one hand, I would feel accomplished by being able to have this project that I've worked on for a year and say, hey, EDUCAUSE, this is what I've done with your LSRS. But at the same time, I know why they made the version that they did because I've read all the research. So I feel a little bit over my head, perhaps, in doing this, but I think just as long as I'm keeping my eyes on Truman itself, the most important thing.
No, yeah, I mean, I think starting in Truman is good. I think you're
Yeah,
doing a great job.
thanks.
Starting in Truman is good, and part of the project too is just kind of redefining our classroom classification.
Right.
some of you who are older may remember the old classroom classification system we had of A level, B level, C level. And we've realized kind of recently that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense anymore. With because A level represented basically your standard array, it had a computer and a projector basically. B level was enhanced sound, so the room had speakers and an amp. And C level had some sort of interactivity built in that could have included lecture capture, some stuff like that. So we realized, I mean, most rooms have, I mean, there's very few A level left. Most rooms have speakers. Every room pretty much has at least a hover cam, if not more.
Post-COVID kind of blew that out of the water.
Yeah, so that system doesn't really make sense anymore. So when we're doing all this, we're also kind of looking at revamping the classroom classification system, and we've got some ideas. I don't want to get in the weeds on that right now, just because it's turning out to be a little more complicated than we wanted.
Snowballing a little bit.
Yeah, but hopefully we'll have some information to share on that at some point too.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, we're looking forward to see what you got, Kate. I think this will be really exciting.
I try my best. I honestly, I think that being a pretty recent student has made this why it's been such a passion project for
And
me.
I remember when I used to be able to say that.
What do you mean? You still can. Just take like a grad class or something. I feel like because I was a student in spaces where I'm neurodivergent, so it can be difficult for me in any space to feel like I can connect with the things being taught to me.
Sure.
But there are definitely some spaces where I feel like I connected a little bit easier. And, I was just kind of thinking philosophically or abstractly, like why I felt like that in those spaces. And I was like, okay, I'm sure other students also feel the same way. Why don't we try to work towards, because again, at Truman as faculty and staff, we're looking at students, right? Like this is the foundation of Truman.
Sure.
So why not try to tailor these spaces for our students, So I think that I just felt a little bit of sympathy on that side of things that.
And it's a really useful lens to look at stuff like that through. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with our first segment of our first session of our new segment.
Folklore and
folklore and fairy tales. Now this is embarrassing. I haven't told you this yet.
Okay.
So I picked the name folklore and fairy tales because I wanted to do one of those like cutesy, like using AI in the name.
Oh, because of fairy tales.
Yeah, fairy tales. But here's the thing. I was originally planning on doing AL for AI in tales until I realized there's actually an AI in fairy. So it took me way too long to realize that. So you'll see the logo. It looks better than I had originally planned. But yeah, I'm glad that I realized that before, like, you could get on my case about it.
Because I would have laughed at you.
Oh, that would have been so embarrassing.
And how about for our audience and for me, because this is fairly new to me as well, explain what our new folklore and fairy tales segment.
Yeah, so I kind of get into it in the video, but basically we're just going to look at some piece of culture every week that we do this, be it like a short story, or I mean we can even do video games or
fiction, some
kind of fiction.
Okay.
Yeah, some kind of fiction, and just kind of try to learn what we can about AI from it,
like preconceived notions or whatever.
Yeah, preconceived notions. This one's actually an older piece of fiction from before really AI as we even really know it could have existed. But I think, we can maybe learn something interesting about just maybe fears people have about AI from this one. So it'll be a little darker. Maybe we'll do a more optimistic one later. Sure. But
And what made you choose the name folklore and fairy tales?
Well, again,
was it for the pun on the AI?
It was the pun on the AI.
Okay.
That's pretty much it.
Okay.
Even though I wasn't even using an AI when I thought about it, I was using an AL. But...
As the folklorist, I feel the need to clarify on this as well. Folklore, and I'm not saying that you're doing this, even though I'd take offense if you did. Folklore doesn't necessarily mean largely believed falsehoods, but rather just sort of the culture's stories and myths and conceptions and ways of viewing the world. So sure. When we're taking fiction, I think I know which one we're going to be looking at as well. So I'm going to take this as the example. Not necessarily looking at the perhaps false or whatever conceptions of AI that they might be presenting to you, but rather why are they presenting that version of AI, right? So it's
Right.
kind of
That's
like,
kind of the angle that I was going for. So
okay,
we're kind of trying to learn like kind of truths about
sure.
AI, lessons about AI.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's gonna be interesting. Again, I'm a folklore nerd, so I will find this very, very fun.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and roll the tape. Hey, welcome to Folklore and Fairy Tales, our new weekly segment where we discuss depictions of AI in literature, film, urban legends, and more, in an effort to ask, what has artificial intelligence meant to humanity throughout our history, and what lessons might we be able to gain from that? Now, today we're going to be talking about the terrifyingly sadistic supercomputer AM, as told in Harlan Ellison's 1967 existential horror short story, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. Now, this story can get pretty dark, and while I'm not going to get too into the nitty-gritty on details, I do want to issue a general content warning. So if you feel like you may be sensitive to some topics, including torture and abuse, no judgment here. You can skip to the next section of the podcast via both the video progress bar and links in the description below. AM, originally AM for Allied Master Computer, though its victims would retroactively apply more negative meanings to that, such as aggressive menace, was one of many almost incomprehensibly massive underground supercomputer complexes that gained sentience near the end of World War III in Ellison's story. Its subterranean tubes and hallways expanded for hundreds, if not thousands of miles all across the globe. Remember, this story was written when computers like ENIAC were the entire size of a room, but had the internal memory of about 20 words. So anyway, AM, now sentient, so its name also takes a bit of a reference to Descartes as well, kills all of humanity. You know, standard sci-fi AI stuff, with the exception of our 5 heroes. Well, it's not actually accurate to call them heroes, though they are certainly victims. Ted, Nimdoc, Gorister, Ellen, and Benny. See, somehow being trapped inside of AM's vast tunnels has actually given the AI absolute power over these 5 people. He can control their thoughts, the physics around them, compel their actions, and AM, he feels about humanity the way Garfield feels about a Monday without lasagna. He hates us, so he uses these 5 remaining people as his eternal punching bag, endlessly punishing them in sadistic and unusual ways, while also preventing their deaths for well over a century. These people are essentially stuck in a very literal hell, and that's what I found so interesting about I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. The AI depicted doesn't really initially come off anywhere near how an actual technology would work in the real world. It's more like some kind of magic or a mad god than the typical depictions you typically see with HAL 9000, the Terminator, or Ultron even. The story itself feels almost more like a demented fantasy than sci-fi because of how ridiculously impossible its situations were. Maybe you could argue that the 5 victims were actually digital copies of their now deceased human counterparts and were uploaded to a program, where AM did in fact have this level of omniscient and omnipresent all-power. But in my reading of the text at least, it seemed intended to be very much in our physical world. So what's actually going on here, then? Well, we can't ignore the fact that this story was written about 58 years ago. I guess you can't really blame Ellison for not totally being accurate in his depictions of the future. Computing technology has changed a ton just in my own lifetime even. But I feel like something else is going on here too. If we look at the ways in which AM tortured his captives, maybe we can see what Ellison seemed to truly fear. AM shaped and molded the bodies, minds, and worlds around our protagonists. He contorted them into inhuman shapes, sent terrifying and incomprehensible monsters to attack them. AM warped its own tunnels and passages to confuse and disorient its prey. He made these people lose their minds, their trust in one another. He erased from them what made them unique, their intelligence, their personalities, their free will, and even their sexual orientation. So as you can see, what AM does to his victims is whittle away who they are. Again, this may be done over a long time, over a century in this story, but by the end all that's left is an amorphous blob whose dim, lingering thoughts barely resemble those of the person it had once been. AM is AI, sure, but it also takes away the humanity of those around it. You might even go as far to say that AM reprogrammed them in its own abstract image, husks of their former selves representing basically nothing. And yeah, that's a scary thought, but also, does it sound familiar? Are you concerned that generative AI is taking away student voices and creativity? Are you afraid that the amalgamations of images that AI creates are just stealing from real human artists? Does the content that you see now feel soulless and deeply rooted in the uncanny valley? I feel you. I think there are a lot of complexities with the ethics and humanity of AI that we as a culture are really going to have to come to a better understanding of over the next several years. I certainly don't really have any easy fixes for us today. AI is here, whether we like it or not, and the irony is not lost on me in how I've used it in this very presentation. It can be a really useful tool, and that's just kind of the world we live in right now. We can take proactive steps to try to control it. Consider, if you haven't already, adopting a policy for AI for your course. The outline released at last fall's opening assembly is definitely a good template to get started on this if you haven't already. Inform yourself about AI. Read responsibly and talk to others. I know I and the rest of the Learning Technologies team would be happy to help you develop a strategy for AI in your course, but also it's likely that somebody in your school is an expert as well. Our working group from over last summer had representation from all over campus. Finally, try it out yourself if you haven't already and are comfortable. Using AI is part of the key to understanding it. I realize some people may have legitimate environmental, ethical, and security concerns, and I totally get that, no pressure. But if you are willing to give it a shot and just haven't for whatever reason, tooling around generative AI can give you a better idea of what it's actually capable of. And hopefully, once you have a better understanding, you can work not only to mitigate AI, but also maybe even enhance your course with it. And yeah, AI certainly is not capable of turning you into a lumpy ball of flesh with no mouth. But we still need to use it as an informed and conscious individual, because if we're responsible, we're certainly not condemned to Ellison's dehumanizing and depersonalized nightmare of I have no mouth and I must scream. All right, yeah. So hopefully that wasn't too depressing. But yeah, I mean, I think that ultimately I do want to walk away with a positive message from it, and I think that we do. That as long as you're a responsible user of AI, you can really help keep it in check and make sure that we don't end up in some sort of terrifying hellscape.
Yeah. Or we live in the woods, which is what I'm planning on doing that.
That's true. Yeah,
Yeah.
you could live in the woods.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
You're dressed for it.
I'm kind of dressed for it. Yeah. And Bigfoot is my favorite folkloric mythical creature. So
Yeah,
I feel
there you go.
a deep connection to him.
Yeah. So, by the way, last day of the month now, February 28th, I think. It's not a leap year. February 28th should be a Friday from 9 to noon. We've got the QMO conference coming up.
Yep.
So we'll send a link out about that. We probably already have by the time this has come out, but that should be exciting. There's a lot of really cool topics on there. I know that we've got presentations on the high doc method of teaching. We've got a lot of cool AI tools that you'll be able to see being used if we haven't terrified you of AI today. But yeah, that is again February 28th, 9-ish to noon-ish. And we'll send out a little more information about that soon.
Cool.
All right. Well,
thanks, Thomas.
Thank you, Kate.
Yeah,
have a good weekend.
Yeah. Oh, it is. Thank gosh.
Yes. Yes. This is Friday, finally. All right. Well, we will see you guys later.